Good morning. This is Michele Floriani, Chief Marketing Officer at Sequoia, and on behalf of everyone at Sequoia and our friends at One Medical and Wilson Sonsini and 650, I'd like to welcome you to our Return to Work webinar series in support of our Return to Work program. Very excited to have all of you today. Thanks for sharing some time with us. I want to start off sharing a beautiful looking slide that my good friend Steve Kim asked us to put. He's a very smart legal mind, so I do what he says, but the summary of this, of course, is that this is a fast-moving topic, and our clinical friends, our legal friends, and all of the experts are following it. It changes on a daily basis. So just know that as we share stats and ideas about and suggestions about the path forward today, that it's an ongoing discussion, and that's part of why it's important that we come together to discuss and review it. Little bit about how we're going to spend our time unpacking the term return to work and the path forward. I will say this before we even get into that. The return to work, I'm a word guy, I'm a marketing man. It's a funny term because I'm pretty sure everyone on this call has been working a lot, and I'm pretty sure a lot of us will not actually physically return to offices as this unfolds, or not anytime soon. But it is the category name for this movement and this consideration and challenge that so many companies are facing. So we'll continue to use this term until it gets refined or evolves to really reflect what is going on, which is a really deep and profound challenge for our businesses and our people to figure out, so that we can continue to do what the missions are of all of our companies and the things that we believe in our work. We'll start off with Bob Lawson, our CFO, talking about really the challenge and sizing it up. And, there's a lot of information. I'm sure all of us watch the news, but giving us some perspective on what's ahead and what it means for companies. And then today we're going to unpack a framework that has 5 components. We're very excited to have not only Greg Golub, our CEO, and Steve Kim, who's our Chief Legal Administration Officer, helping to pull up the hood on some of the tools and ideas we have for the components we've been thinking of, but also Will Kimbrough from One Medical and Marina Tsatsalis from Wilson Sonsini, and they will be bringing their expertise to this discussion as well, and we'll close off on the 5th one from Bob Lawson again. And then we'll finish the discussion today focusing a good amount of time on some really what we'd like to call like pragmatic parts of the framework that we are working on right now in partnership with our partners, and making some things that are part of the Return to Work program really tangible and actionable, so you can take those away today. And we'll finish with some closing statements. Little housekeeping. So everyone here today is in what we call participant mode. So it's listen-only mode. There's a lot of people happily on the call. But you can use the questions function, which you'll see in your navigation bar. These days, most people are pretty good about using Zoom, so put those questions in. If we have time, we'll tackle them today. It's going to be a pretty full agenda. But the importance of putting your questions in is that we will bring them into the circle on our side. And, we're running a survey I'll tell you a little bit about later. We could put some questions in there. We're running roundtables, and certainly we're going to do this as a webinar series. So we'll take those questions forward into future webinars, make sure they're addressed. This is a recorded webinar, and we will be posting it in the Return to Work page where on sequoia.com, which you could get to through the events section, or just going to sequoia.com, Return to Work. Okay, so without further ado, I'd like to invite up Bob Lawson, Chief Financial Officer from Sequoia, to give us some perspective on sizing up the challenge. Bob?
Thanks, Michele. I think I drew the short straw today, getting to talk about sizing up this challenge. It's a really hard challenge to size up. I think CB Insights last week reported that in Q1 earnings calls, companies have used the word unprecedented an unprecedented number of times. We truly are in unprecedented territory. You all see the same statistics that we do about the terrible human cost of COVID-19 on the world. And while it feels like we've been dealing with this for a long time, we know that we're still in the early stages. And the human cost is not felt just medically, but economically, as companies are taking action to reduce costs and protect their businesses. The Department of Labor issued their weekly unemployment claims report today. There are now more than 30 million Americans who are unemployed. 1 out of every 5 Americans who had a job in February doesn't have one today. And if we look at the economy, US GDP shrank 4.8% in the first quarter. And most of that impact was just in March. I think Morgan Stanley's predicting US GDP will decline 40% in Q2. And this is a dynamic, ongoing situation as we're all monitoring what's happening in medicine and science and technology and politics and economics, and doing all that while running our businesses. I can relate as a CFO of a 400-person company that looks a lot like yours. You know, there's a joke in Sequoia that people asking if I was around during the Great Depression. For the record, I wasn't. But I was around when the dot-com bubble burst, and I was around for the 2008 recession. And this, in many ways, feels a lot worse, both because of the human cost of it, but also because it's changed so much of how we work. Right? We are a very people-centric, culture-driven company with 400 colleagues in 6 offices in 3 states in the US and in India. And our culture has really been face-to-face. We work face-to-face with each other. We work face-to-face with our community of clients and our partners. And all that has changed while we're continuing to need to deliver the vital services, things like payroll or 401k management or solving medical benefits claims that our clients need us to do. The good news is we've been dealing with complicated and challenging things for a long time. Our mission is to serve our clients' mission, to help them take care of their businesses and take care of their people. We've been doing that for 19 years since Greg started the company. We've been doing that for 6 years in Sequoia One. We're going to celebrate a 60-year anniversary there tomorrow. And we've invested millions of dollars in the development of the Sequoia platform and HRX to enable us to deliver these things. And it's why all of us at Sequoia come to work, or right now, work from home every day. It's why we exist, right? We exist to come through for people, many of you on this call, who put their trust in us. And we talk about the fact that we are in a relationship business. We define at Sequoia a relationship as 2 people believing that they have a better future together. Greg actually first shared this slide with me when I was considering joining Sequoia, and we actually share it at every company all-hands meeting. And while I'm confident that it's going to be a long and painful and difficult journey ahead, I am confident that we do have a better future together. But a lot's needed to make that happen, and to talk about what's needed, I'll turn it over to Greg.
Great. Thanks, Bob. You know, what's first needed is something we have, which is an admirable group of people and a community. You know, so I wanted to just first start off by talking and honoring the healthcare workers. So many people in the healthcare field, many of them who are on the call today, are doing their best to come through for people in this crisis and putting their own safety in harm's way, and without thinking about it and powering through for all of our benefit. And the same for the essential workers. It's amazing what they're doing, even though they're in harm's way, to just get things done for all of us. And lastly, I wanted to thank everyone who's on the phone today, on the video today, to be a community that's committed to a better path forward. It's what gives motivation and inspiration to everyone here at Sequoia. So thank you. And that motivation and inspiration is needed because it's tough. And there's a lot of people involved, and it's going to be tough, as Bob said, going forward. There's a lot of things coming at us, new things, whether it's needing to have to actually be directly responsible for people's healthcare, you know, balancing all the new policies that come at us on a daily, weekly basis that actually affect our direct lives. And this is all happening while we have to do our day-to-day normal business and balancing all this with the dynamic personal life trials and tribulations that so many of us have. You know, so I just wanted to acknowledge that, and I can't see anybody on the video, but I'm sure there's a lot of heads nodding. And what's it's going to take a lot of good alignment of a lot of people working together in new roles. And it's important to avoid working in silos, whether it's IT and HR and legal and technology and financials and communications. Not only is it the day-to-day that we've been doing, but it's with this new and complicated and very high risk situation, we're going to have to work even better together in alignment. And one of the formulas, the key formulas, is to really take a holistic and pragmatic approach because it's complicated and it's important and dangerous now, and things need to be executed now. And one of the key formulas that we found at Sequoia in these situations is when you need to pull a lot of things together, complicated things together, it's important to leverage technology. And when there's a lot of complexity and you need a good path forward, you need that guidance from experts and client teams. And lastly, to make sure that you really are sure about the steps forward for you and your situation, it's important to really leverage the power and wisdom of your peer community. So when tackling new and complicated problems, it's helpful to start with having a framework. So at this time, as Bob said, it's a dynamic situation, so things will be changing. And after reading lots of articles, talking to experts, spending hundreds of hours on it with our team, we have come up with 5 key components to the approach to a good path forward. And we're going to structure the rest of the meeting today around these 5 components that we think apply to most of our clients. The first one is providing that preventative support and making sure you can deliver the test and care. And then ongoing risk mitigation to make sure the transmission doesn't happen, and that you create policies that are dynamic. Things are going to continue to change, and then you have a good decision-making process and you're able to communicate to your employees. And we want to make sure that today has some action and some ability to understand some tangible go-forward basis, because it's very difficult in this situation. So throughout the meeting today, you're going to see this brand mark and on 2 points for each sections. And then at the last section, we'll give an overview of each one of them at the end and reviewing our path forward. So the first component is to provide preventative support. And that's the first thing to address. And it's actually the most direct. It's something that all employers can actually, and their staff can address right away. So let's take a look at what that entails. Again, it's a key objective is about preparing your people environment with the tools and services that prevent transmission while you're actually continuing to run your business. And the good news is there's lots of services that are spinning up and more are coming to meet your company's needs. The challenge is to finding out which ones are the right ones to do. And these are not necessarily the exciting and fun shopping list. And so there'll be more things that you'll have to address, but these are the ones we know at this point. And there's a simple framework we use for prioritizing in this situation. A matrix of transmission risk and business interruption, which roles can't do their job from work from home from a long period of time, and where are people where there's a high risk of transmission. So for example, in our situation, we have a pretty decent sized New York City office. That's very far on the right of the horizontal axis. So we'll be taking slower moves to bring them back to work in the office. And so to wrap up on the provide preventative support and the key actions, it's really important to identify the right vendors, well-being programs, and best point of solutions now, and to put in extra support for your people at home, technology, ergonomics, and to prepare now who's going to come into the office, how do you prioritize and when, and to make sure when they do come in that you protect them when they're in the office with a set of best practices.
Great. Thank you, Greg. Appreciate it. So I just want to highlight, as Greg pointed out, that we're going to spot 2 of these items on this list to show you later on really what we're doing to help make that a real solution that you guys can act on. So we'll spot these two here, and I want to continue to section 2 and invite up our special guests. We have Will Kimbrough from One Medical. One Medical has been doing some wonderful work, and I'd say that really we're ahead of a lot of the thinking about what are going to be clients' needs, and obviously in a large part of their domain, which is the healthcare and mental balance of our people. And so excited to invite up Will, who's been doing a webinar series of his own for One Medical, of course, sharing a lot of great knowledge. Thank you, Will, for being here today and kind of exploring this second component with us.
Great, thanks for having me, Michaela. So
Yeah.
My name is Will Kimbrough. Nice to meet everybody. I'm a primary care doctor with One Medical. I've been working here about 9 years, but my background's as an internal medicine doctor with additional background in public health training. And my day job, so pre-COVID, was as the medical director for our virtual care services and our new services team. So, but of course, for the past couple months, it's been nothing but all COVID all day, every day. So really glad to share some of what we've learned so far. So what we're going to look at today is delivering testing and care in this very dynamic, very uncertain situation. So we're going to look at how to partner with employers on really mitigating risk to bring employees back into the workplace. And some of the good news here is that there's a ton of fast developments in terms of testing methods, availability. Really want to also flag some of the unknowns. There's been a lot of stuff that's been moving really quickly and a lot of uncertainty around what testing options there are, how to interpret them, all those things. And so, a lot of this is really fluid and dynamic. And so I'll try to flag some of those uncertain parts of the response to this too. So this is the curve. Who thought a few months ago that everybody would be sort of casual armchair epidemiologists by the end of it? But the way that I've started to think about this slide is, I think the old saying is, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. But unfortunately, as this slide shows, it's a sprint and it's a marathon. We're all really optimistic about this one curve that we're coming off of, but the reality is the baseline doesn't go back to where we were in January in terms of normal sort of crowded workplaces, business as usual. It's going to require some ongoing risk reduction and risk mitigation. And unfortunately, there's more peaks to come. And so the more we can do now to partner together with employers to think about how to bring people into the workplace and what contingency plans are for future outbreaks and all those things, the better prepared we'll be for when those very possible things happen in the future. Also, as Greg mentioned, the geography really matters here, right? Like the New York City curve is very different than the San Francisco curve, which is very different than even San Diego, just a few hours further down the coast. So really thinking locally and partnering with employers to think through who is needed in the workplace, who can telework most effectively, all those things is really part of how we're thinking about really reducing that workplace risk. So when we think about what all's in the headlines, there's things that we know and things that we just don't. And the more clear we can be about those, the more of a shared conversation we can have about how to plan and move forward in this very complex situation. So the information's changing constantly. So what we think is true today, even CDC guidance and sort of high level frameworks are evolving and thinking on a very continuous basis. One of the biggest underlying problems with this current outbreak is that infectious carriers can be asymptomatic or silent carriers, as sort of described in the press a good bit. The disease can also be passed through the air, from touching objects. Like there's just so many different ways of transmission and contagion. It makes it really hard to track exactly what all to do to reduce risk. And then there's the testing itself, which I'll drill into a little bit deeper in a moment, but the accuracy really varies. And the honest truth is there's no perfect test. So even if, with the most aggressive testing strategy, there still remains some unknowns with it. Social distancing is going to remain important. So again, just the really dense, fully packed sports events, things like that, it's going to be a while before any of those things really come back into what we think of as normal. Things that we really don't know though. So what's the likelihood of recurrence going forward? When's it going to happen? There's increasing sort of thinking about what this coming flu season is going to be like, an appropriate concern, just because it's going to be a really complicated thing to think through what's flu, what's COVID, how do we tell which is which, and how do we respond as a society or as a city, as a company. One of the big unknowns is, what does immunity look like? If you've had COVID once, does it actually protect you against being infected again? With a lot of other similar viruses, the answer is yes, but this disease is all of, at most 7-8 months old. And so just the science isn't mature enough to really understand it. And as a outsprout of that idea is the concept of herd immunity, which of course everyone's really optimistic about, but just there's not enough known to really be able to make big plans on it. And then of course, at the intersection of science, politics, and lots of other things is, when are the shelter-in-place ordinances going to be lifted that really sort of change when any one community starts returning to work? So I just want to take a second to really look a little bit deeper at testing, just because, again, speaking of how 2 months ago nobody thought that they'd be experts on curves, who thought any of us would know so much about PCR tests or antibody tests? So most of what we should be talking about with testing is the PCR. It's based on really well-established technology. It looks for one specific snippet of DNA of genetic material from the virus that causes COVID. It's collected by a swab and then run through a machine. It takes a few minutes to a few hours to actually run the test, but normally it takes a couple days to get the results. The limitations there are that there are some accuracy concerns. The swab might miss some of the virus. And so, we currently think of about 25% of infections being missed with the sample collection there. But then really it's a snapshot at the moment. So, if somebody tests negative on day 1, it doesn't mean that they're necessarily not going to be contagious on day 7 or 8. The nice thing is this is the most widely available one. So the commercial labs are all offering it. It's really scaling up quickly. And so in terms of access to testing, it's improving quickly. The antibody test, on the other hand, that's the new one to the scene. So over the past week or so, it's been getting a lot more attention. And what it's looking for is the body's immune system to the virus. This is tested by a blood sample. But the problem is, again, just going back to how new of a disease this is, we don't know for sure that the antibodies mean immunity yet. It's a reasonable guess, but we just don't know that for certain, or what level of antibodies would be needed to sort of provide that immunity. There's a lag. It takes time after infection to actually build antibodies to a high enough level to be measured, so it's not that snapshot in time test. And then some labs are only looking at IgG, which we've got a little bit more of a nuanced approach to what we're thinking about with testing, which looks at a different type of antibody to help close some of that 25% gap from the PCR test. Finally, on the antibody front, this is the one that's caused the most sort of strain on our thinking. Is there's just been a lot of lags with FDA clearance and getting things available on the market. And what is available is largely stuff that we don't know a lot about yet. Which brings us to the next big point on testing. Not all tests are created equal. If you look through the press, you can easily find examples of test kits making it to market and then being pulled off by the FDA. There's an example of the United Kingdom, who purchased several million kits of a specific type of antibody test that turned out to just be fairly useless. They decided not to use it at all. And more or less the FDA is just moving so quickly, their authorization or their clearance doesn't quite represent the same level of rigor that it does during normal times. And so we're working hard as an organization to actually separately validate a lot of these kits that we plan on standing by once they do become more widely available. So just when thinking about all these tests, there is turnaround time. So just how long does it take? There's how comfortable is it to collect the samples for your employees? Some of the ways of collecting it can be pretty invasive and uncomfortable, which hypothetically could impact how likely your employees are to show up for repeat testing if that's what you need. And then just test availability, as I've already mentioned. So when thinking about the One Medical clinical approach to re-entering the workplace, as has already been previously mentioned, thinking about reducing the density in the workplace is an important part of that, right? So enabling telework, keeping the workplace not as crowded as previously is going to be key no matter what. And that's even with the best risk mitigation strategies in place beyond that. And, since we're really looking at a long timeline of this, potentially waiting until a vaccine's available before things really return to a more old normal sort of way of thinking, it's probably not realistic for most employers to just have huge amounts of their employees stay home. So really, there's a few points for how we're thinking about things, which is reintroduce people back to work in a phased cohort sort of based approach, which means bring people back strategically and in selective batches. Our clinical recommendation is an aggressive testing strategy. We're willing to work with lots of different approaches, just knowing that the testing's complicated and can be expensive in some settings, all those things. But at the same time, it is the clinically best way to sort of narrow that risk gap that needs to be closed in a lot of settings. And then ongoing testing. So, once everyone's back at work, if there's still continued spread of COVID in a community, being able to provide ongoing testing, especially if someone were to become sick at work, to help, track down anyone that they might have had close contact with. But then also another one of our real keystone moments of thinking about this is regular screening. So if somebody screens with the PCR today, comes back negative, but 3 days later they're going to work and wake up with a fever, we want to make sure that it's really easy to capture that information, keep that person out of work, and help get them the clinical guidance that they need to feel better. So the next slide really is just a quick visualization of our cohort approach to bringing people back. So, this is really showing that we help partner with employers to think about who to bring back at what times to help sort of reduce that risk during the different steps. But what I'd like to spend a little bit more time on is on the next slide, which is really about the different pillars. To, the way I think about this is One Medical as a primary care company. We're a primary care platform addressing a pandemic, not just something that's popping up as a pandemic solution. And so we weren't able to turn off that primary care mindset when thinking about how to help people through this. So it really is about how do we test and screen in the workplace, but also how do we help with ongoing screening treatment? How do we assist with the ongoing well-being of employees, just because a lot of people have now delayed their primary care needs, their screenings, all those things outside of just COVID-related things. But also, how do we address the mental, emotional, and well-being of people, just because that's widely thought to be the next pandemic that's going to follow this first one. So just, wanted to flag that it's not just about testing, it's really about having a comprehensive approach to address all the different aspects of wellness in this very complicated time that's predominated by thinking about COVID. And one of the ways that we really do that is with our virtual care. So by having a robust virtual platform, it really enables us to meet people at home and keep them out of the workplace if it's an appropriate for them to be there. So by doing online COVID screening, having video chat as part of our platform, and it's been there for a long time now, so it's not just there in response to this current crisis. We've got really robust systems to help enable telehealth, which keeps people out of the workplace when they shouldn't be there for the good of the greater workplace community. So, and with that, I'll turn it back over to Michaela for next thoughts.
Great. Thank you, Will. And just as you guys read the summary here, I want to call out two of the areas we're going to spotlight. All tie back to that testing and ongoing care through One Medical and some of the things people can do. So thank you so much for that. That was great information. Thanks for unpacking it for us. I wanted to now go to Steve Kim, our Chief Legal Administration Officer at Sequoia, person that on our side, along with Bob and Greg, has really been central at kind of coming up with the plan. And obviously Steve's role, he looks at it from the legal and policy and administrative angle. And so great person to take us through the mitigating risks of the return. So Steve, without further ado.
Thank you, McKelly. Sure. Great to be here, everyone. Nice to address you. Yeah, so in a lot of ways, this is the moment of truth. I mean, if Greg was talking about some of the proactive measures that employers can take, and Will, through the great work of One Medical, is making testing and other virtual care options available. Now is kind of the time you can start to imagine what it might be to bring people back. And so what I'll talk about a little bit is some of the elements of a plan, and I'll flash some visuals and not linger on it. But this couldn't happen without some of the things that Greg and Will talked about. Of course, obviously, there's a challenge, right? The whole point of the shelter-in-place orders and working from home is you start to reduce the number of risks that we as employers face. And then by definition, by bringing people back, you are taking on that risk. And so if I just sort of walk you through our journey and trying to figure out what the plan is, there are a lot of templates out there, but I wanted to start with from some first principles. So we took a look at the various orders out there, the federal blueprint, and we can move forward. And they give some hints as to some of the elements that we as employers should care about. So like the federal blueprint, right? They confer to the state some responsibilities on testing and making things available. But there's also some guidance for employers, and these are all the things we started to become familiar with. Social distancing and taking your temperature and making sure that you have some protective equipment at the office. And you can look at the California and the New York blueprints, which give some specifics. And this, I'm not going to go through it, but if you just lay it out, there are some commonalities. So we kind of took that, and we can move forward to try to think about what literally a plan might look like. And I'm certainly not going to go through every line here, but so if we click forward, so our approach is we kind of broke our plan into 3 phases. And we can just go to the final phase here. In our methodology, we looked at all of the things that we needed to do to prepare, and then for each phase, and then try to lay out what are the protocols in each phase that we need to pay attention to. And it's all with an eye towards operational efficiency, but also to mitigate the risk. Risk for the employers, but certainly if you're coming back to work, you want to know that there are some things in place that keep you individually safe. And so as Will said, right, testing is critical. Identifying a cadence for ongoing testing is also important. But also critically important is what happens in between, because you can't and probably don't want to test every day. So things like self-assessment is important. But then you also need a way to manage the groups you bring in. And so this is, I think it's becoming common for employees to look at phases of returns with some sort of trigger. And then the protocols can change with each phase. But no matter how you phase the groups that come in, if you can mitigate at the individual level and you can make sure you're observing what's happening with those groups when they come in, then you can do things like contact trace. If, forbid that someone gets sick in that group, then you know how to assess who you need to contact. Managing cohorts also gives you the ability to shrink your facility's footprint, put the cohorts that are coming in into a more defined space so that you can do all the things that Greg talked about at the end of every day or of every week. So we can go to the next slide. So I know that was quick, and some of the tools we can make available, and then at the end I'll come back and talk about some of the things we do specifically to make these actionable.
Is that you'll touch base on as we. Thank you so much. I'd like to now turn it over to Marina. So thankful to have you here today, Marina. Thank you very much to walk us through the 4th component of the framework, defining dynamic policies.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here. Thank you, McKelly. So the choices a company makes in the context of COVID and the return to work obviously need to fit within a complex legal framework. There are a number of new laws and existing legislation that really impact the employment relationship and the rules in the context of COVID-19. I'm sure you've all received alerts and read news and see all kinds of publications about all of the new legal developments that impact the employment setting and what an employer must do, should do to satisfy the myriad obligations that it has, including rules around privacy, disability issues and accommodations, the rules around medical examinations, impacting protected classes adversely perhaps, the obligation to provide a safe working environment under OSHA, and the overlay of all of the local and state orders and directives that are really in a state of flux that are coming up. So The good news is that there are law firms, us and others, and advisors and others that you've heard speaking today who are staying on top of this. We are reading the updates and the changes as they come out. We are interpreting them and applying them and giving advice on their application to our clients' businesses. And we are developing policies and tools to help prepare employers and to help employers prepare to have employees resume work at the work site in a way that makes sense for the business. So the challenge is, unlike other types of HR policies, handbooks, maybe a sexual harassment policy or something that's pretty uniform or that can be easily adjusted, this situation is very fluid, as others have said. And it's complicated by the fact that there are so many rules and there is quite the deep overlay from various health authorities, from agencies, from governments, and legislation, new and existing legislation that all come together and impact what employers can and should do in the context of COVID-19. So, legal considerations for screening employees. We've heard a lot about screening, about testing, and we've heard about temperature taking and various other modes to screen employees. So, employers must furnish, OSHA says, to each worker employment and a place of employment that is free from recognized hazards that are causing or are likely to cause death or serious physical harm. And that would include, of course, COVID-19. In addition, OSHA says in all workplaces where exposure to COVID-19 may occur, which seems to me to be all workplaces, that prompt identification and isolation of potentially infectious individuals is a critical first step in protecting workers, visitors, and others at the work site. And so the takeaway there is, in order to satisfy the general duty under OSHA, you have to promptly identify and isolate potentially infectious individuals. The EEOC has relaxed some of its standards and made clear that employers may now even administer COVID-19 tests to test employees before they enter the workplace and as a condition of entry to determine if they have the virus. So that is the lay of the obligation under OSHA and the green light from the EEOC to go ahead and conduct that medical examination for this specific purpose. Now, of course, there are lots of considerations there and things to watch out for. Ensuring privacy in terms of how is the test to be administered? Where will it be administered? Who is going to administer it? How are you going to retain those records? Those are confidential medical and health records that the Americans with Disabilities Act has specific requirements for in terms of their retention and maintenance. Discrimination claims, you tested him but not her. So consistency in terms of who is tested and also the consequences of the testing and what you do with the results. So what are the standards and what are the ramifications of particular results? Also in places like California, we have the California Consumer Privacy Act, which depending on the nature of your business may require notice at the time of testing, and that includes temperature testing, COVID testing, and other means of collecting information from employees. So identify and engage employees who may need accommodations. This is another, as we talk about legal issues and things for employers to watch out for and to think about as they prepare for the next step in this return process. Identifying employees and starting to engage with them even now, even before it's time to bring some other employees back to work, is one thing that employers ought to be doing in order to prepare. So there will be employees who have a disability as defined by federal or state law, whether that is physical or a mental impairment or condition. You can imagine employees with anxiety disorders, PTSD, and other conditions that maybe are exacerbated by what's been going on here with COVID-19. So they may be entitled as a matter of law to a reasonable accommodation. You can start and should start those discussions. There are others who may not be covered by federal or state law, but who have been identified by various federal agencies, for example, state, California, state, who are in higher risk groups, people who are a little bit older, people who may have some underlying medical conditions that are defined. And so starting to engage those individuals and make accommodations for them is also an important step in preparing for the return to work. There are other employees who will have concerns. They may not be disabled, either physically or have a mental disorder or impairment. They may not even fall into a high risk category, but I know I've already had a number of clients who have called and have said, you know, we may have an essential component of our business and there are employees who we think are necessary to run the essential portion of our business, but they're reluctant to come in for one reason or another. And it could be because of they take public transportation to work, or because they live with someone who may be high risk, or because of childcare obligations that are continuing with schools being out. So determining how you will address those needs by various aspects of your employees, and they can be identified in advance via survey or some other means, and coming up with a consistent way or a consistent structure to determine how those concerns will be voiced, who will handle them, how much flexibility will be afforded, and again, some consistency in the response to avoid potential discrimination claims. Developing and communicating a return to work policy is something that's pivotal here because it brings together and addresses a lot of the issues we were talking about. It would address, for example, screening requirements for re-entry to the work site, what those procedures might be, how the results will be handled. It'll give instructions to employees about what they should do depending on the results of their test. If you have a temperature or another symptom that's identified by the CDC as potentially symptomatic of infection, if you test positive, what should I do as an employee? So these are, the policy forces you to determine what your procedure will be. And it is a means of communicating to your workforce what the rules are so they are aware of what they should be expect and what they'll be required to do when they come back to work. Social distancing protocols would be covered there. There are some areas like Bay Area counties where the stay home orders include exhibits and protocols that need to be posted by employers. You could take care of that. Give specific instructions about face coverings. New York has different rules on face coverings than some Bay Area counties, for example. It could cover and should cover commuting and travel issues. The return of company confidential information that has migrated to various people's homes in connection with our telecommuting situation. And also, again, it could check the box on postings and not notifications that employees need to receive. It also could include and should include an acknowledgement form whereby employees will acknowledge, for example, that they've read the policy, they understand the rules for coming back, they're going to follow the distancing protocols and the other PPE requirements. It could also cover consent to the extent that consent is necessary from employees to undergo certain kinds of testing. You could cover that in the context of an acknowledgement as well. So very important to think about all of the issues that a policy entails and to have a comprehensive policy that could be rolled out to the workforce. So
Great. Go ahead, Marina.
Yeah, so just in terms of defining what the policy should be, we have a bullet pointed list here. Again, it's important to document the choices being made in the policy. We are working with 650 and with Sequoia and developing a framework and an assessment sort of structure for employers to help them make sure that they are prepared, and also a return to work policy that will encompass all of the issues that we're talking about. And it's important, as I said, to keep up with the constant changes here, as others have mentioned. Many of the rules and the guidance from health authorities, from local and state and even federal government levels is evolving and changing as the situation evolves. So not only pivotal to have a policy, but to have a means to stay in touch with the changes to the various guidance and orders being issued so that the policy can stay updated and current and reflect what the changes are and communicate it to your workforce.
That's great. Thank you, Marina, so much. That was super helpful. I just want to highlight the two things that I'll touch base on in a little bit that tie to what you were just saying. And thank you very much for taking us through that. I want to move on to Bob Lawson talking about the decision-making process and really the importance of connecting and communicating those decisions. Bob, over to you.
So what do we do with all this, with all the great advice that we got from Will and Marina and everyone to date? Well, we need to make decisions. We need to build a playbook because we're going to be in a position where we're going to need to make decisions dynamically as things play out. And the good news is there are lots of sources of information. Go to any law firm website and you'll see a COVID-19 page. There are a bunch of services that exist to help you, but it's challenging to know how to integrate all that, what advice to take, how to turn it into a pragmatic and actionable plan that works to both build policies and communicate effectively with your employees and their families. And I started this session talking about trust, and we've never been at a time when the level of trust that is required between companies and employees has been higher, as our team members count on us as business leaders to help protect the health and safety of they and their families during this, and we run our businesses and come through for all of the people that depend on us. So some actions to come out of this: develop your playbook now. We know it'll change as things evolve and develop, but it's important to have it in place to start. Assign owners, and we'll share some of that with you as we go forward, and build a way to be able to communicate effectively with your team members as we progress here.
Great. So thank you, Bob, for that. And really the two things are developing the playbook and communicating that to your people. We'll touch base on that. So let's now kind of shift, and I'd love to kind of talk a little bit more about those 5 components and some really kind of tangible things, pragmatic things that we can do, and highlight, of the framework, the things that we're actively working on right now so people can find a solution and a path forward. First, this webinar today symbolizes the launch of a commitment of Sequoia and our key partners on really putting a program together for the return to work effort. And in that program are going to be things like surveys and reports. So we did a COVID survey many of you participated in early April. It was amazing, a lot of great insights that, just mining the wisdom and decision-making and considerations of the community. We're going to continue doing that for CEOs and a 2.0 version of that same report for HR and ops folks. This webinar series will continue to go into those 5 components and unpack them deeper. We're doing CEO roundtables, HR roundtables, just to go and have a more kind of grassroots level discussion, but really get into it. And one of the things we're excited about launching and announcing next week in the webinar is really the Sequoia Bundle for Return to Work, which is a kind of pre-curated, organized, software-enabled grouping of solutions from expert vendors that serve the needs of companies around the return to work need. And a lot of this, of course, is we designed it to run on the Sequoia platform, which has been what we've been investing on heavily for honestly moments like this. I mean, companies, this year it's COVID, but there's ongoing needs, whether they're aspirational or threats or challenges for companies. And putting that all in one place for management and HR and finance and putting it all in one place for employees has always been part of that idea. And so that's what's kind of going to be really helpful with something like the Return to Work bundle. So of course, these actionable highlights, let me go through them real quick. Some things, again, to highlight today. Next week's webinar will go into the details. I'm going to be a little bit conservative about how far I go on this. But working with vendors, we talked about the PPE stuff. Folks like One Medical have done a lot of research. We have other vendors, we have clients actually that have all sorts of stuff that would be useful here. So we're going to leverage the power of buying in bulk and just pass that through and make it easy for folks to order things like that on HRX or on the website, et cetera. The other thing to highlight real quickly around this is what we have in HRX, which is our tool for HR and the teams in finance is all the pre-vetted vendors that are actually there where you can research, discover, and make decisions on vendors that you want or would want to pull in. And we bundle this, so it's very easy. It unlocks a lot of affordable leverage and single, streamlined contracts and all that good stuff. Again, next week, tune in, we'll get into the details of it. We're very excited to partner with One Medical on delivering testing and care. If you're in the Bay Area, we're actually going to utilize our parking lot to do one of One Medical's drive-up tests. So in San Mateo region, involve our actual community, local community in that as well, and provide it to, of course, clients and anyone in our building, anyone in the area that's in San Mateo. One Medical has these facilities around the Bay Area, as you probably know. And of course, the ongoing care, as Will said, like, the need to serve and take care of folks didn't just show up with COVID. There's always been an easy way to access One Medical's great app through our app that brings everything together from employees so that they can continue or respond or get treatment if they have a scenario that requires it. On the mitigating risks and return, risk of return, self-assessment capability. So there's a whole process, of course, that an individual has in a relationship and testing they have with their primary care through, let's say, One Medical or any of the other, great primary care providers out there that they may have to go in and get tested with. But then there's also how that translates to the relationship of cohort management and other things happening in the spaces in the offices. And so that's an aspect of HRX we're working on right now and facilitating that employee and company connection that Bob was highlighting. On policy creation, so 650, which may be a brand some of you are not as familiar with, but it is really kind of the software-enabled brainchild of the Wilson Sonsini team, and it has a section explicitly dedicated to COVID policies. You'd access it like so many other apps you access through HRX and go in there, create and generate really cool stuff, super useful, save everyone a lot of time. And because the nature of this, it will be that policies need to get iterated and refined or expanded on a fairly regular basis. This is a really powerful answer to that, backed by a lot of obviously expertise and intellectual capital of a great brand. So look for that, more details to come as we go through that. On making decisions and communicating. So again, pragmatic. The return to work playbook that we're working on, that we, polished up and put hours, hundreds of hours in, got tons of input from experts we're lucky enough to have in our community, real thought leaders, real smart folks like Will and Marina and their peers, other advisors, all have gone into shaping our playbook, and we effectively want to open source that when it's ready for public consumption. So look for that to come out. And then in HRX, new features actually rolling out this week is expanded ability to have things like a playbook. So you can subscribe to the playbook and get the stream of COVID-related information that you can share with your employees direct from HRX that get sent to the mobile app, as well as the ability to broadcast an instant message to their mobile app so they can get it in context, not lost in email or something. But if you're, let's say, managing a cohort group and you need to send a direct message to advise people about coming or not coming to the office or taking a test or something of that nature, you have a good way to not just send them resources, but also very acute messages when you need to manage the situation. So those are 5 really fast kind of spotlights. Again, we look forward to making these something you really sink your teeth into and going into the details of the entire bundle next week. So tune in, because that's going to be really exciting. The bundle, of course, as you probably figured out, 2 of the anchor vendors and value creators of the return to work bundle are going to be the 650 software and, of course, One Medical's ongoing solution for this. But there will be others too. We're excited to kind of show you who they are and how they click into the bundle and what that's about. And again, next week, we'll have another webinar series. There's also a lot of stuff out there. If you're not familiar with our Growth series, which was a series of webinars we've been doing since early March. And there are a lot of topics there that tie to people and HR and operations that all around the various, different ways that things like recruiting and onboarding and, dealing with maternity leave and paternity leave and all these things have kind of taken a new flavor, right, in the COVID era. And they're discussed by some real panels of smart people from our community. And we actually refreshed our COVID resource page, launched this morning, a really useful organization of things that you can do, organized by some of the latest materials from Sequoia, things to consider on the business side as well as the taking care of your people side. Again, we're blessed with so many vendors and partners in our ecosystem that have great resources out there. We've tried to curate that for you guys so it's easy to find. And then look for the roundtables and the surveys, and I hope you guys participate in that. I was delighted to see we have over almost 100 questions so far, which is great because the plan for us is to fuse that into these surveys, fuse that into these webinars going on, and of course the roundtables and discussions that are going there. I want to close by just shining a light on something that we started in March and just recently upped. Try to really get some resources collectively, but starting with Sequoia in the hands of people who are on the front line really driving to make a difference. So we've upped our amount to $250K commitment to the coronavirus. The exciting part is if anyone out there wants to donate, we match dollar for dollar. There's potentially $750K on the table that we can put in the hands of folks that are really doing great things for people in true need in our community, our broader social community, and neighborhoods all across the country and the world. So big emphasis, of course, on making sure people get the healthcare and the food and the nourishment that they need if they're on hard times, but also partnering with folks and really showing expertise and commitment to making a difference on there and making sure they have the resources. So please join us, give it a good think. I'm sure all of you in some way are doing something. This is another way that we can put a lot of wood behind the arrow and help people who need it during this time. You can find out more information about this. There's a link on the homepage of sequoia.com and through the website. Just in closing, again, this is something that's affecting everyone, obviously, in a lot of different ways. One of the things that we've always been passionate about at Sequoia is pulling the community together to discuss. There's something about the kinds of companies that are Sequoia clients, their focus on people, their innovation, their pioneering attitudes, and their willingness to share both tough lessons and successes to make the collective group advance further. And it's a big part of why we do events like this and the kinds of different forms that they take. It's about unlocking that power of the community. So we're excited as this series goes on to continue to bring all sorts of voices into the discussion, additional partners and vendors that aren't part of today but will be part of future ones, and what their thinkings and their expertise are and what they can bring to it. Always love getting the voice of actual clients who are doing things and learning from that. So thank you for the questions today. Thank you for the attention and interest in this topic. Thanks for being part of taking the whole thing forward. We certainly hope to speak again next week and continue the discussion. Again, participate in some of the surveys. A final shout out to Marina and Will. Thank you. And I know you guys all both have great teams behind you that prepare and make it available so you could spend your time with us today. So appreciate that to everyone involved there. And thank you very much on behalf of everyone at Sequoia.